Press briefing. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's press briefing on wage settlement with former and current Blaze Pizza workers at Stadium Village in Minneapolis. My name is Anthony Advincula, Communications Director at ROC United. Thank you all for joining us in today's press conference. This nearly 30,000 wage theft settlement means the world to the workers. They are here to tell their stories. Along with ROC Minnesota, they are proudly standing together in a shared commitment to combat wage violations and advancing equality in the restaurant industry. With no further introductions, let's hear about how the workers organized themselves that led to the investigation by the city of Minneapolis. Let's welcome Eli Stein, lead organizer for ROC Minnesota. Over to you, Eli.
Thank you, Anthony, and thanks y'all for being here. As Anthony said, my name is Eli Stein. I'm the lead organizer with ROC Minnesota, the Restaurant Opportunity Center of Minnesota. I use they, them pronouns, and I've spent over 13 years working in food service as a server, food runner, cook, and now I'm the lead organizer with ROC Minnesota. We're here today to celebrate a victory that represents a huge step for workers in the food service industry in Minnesota. This victory happened because workers came together, they talked about issues in their workplace, and they took action to create solutions for those issues. And I just want to say that again, that this settlement would not have happened without workers talking to each other, connecting to ROC Minnesota, and taking action to create resolution. What that looked like was workers getting in contact with ROC Minnesota in 2021 and had identified that there were lots of issues at their workplace, and other folks will speak to that. But one of the main issues was that folks really reported not being paid the correct wage, the correct minimum wage, and had even reported to us that they had brought this up to managers and the owners, and action wasn't taken. And so we supported workers connecting to the City of Minneapolis Civil Rights Department and filing wage theft and paid sick and safe time complaints with the city. In that partnership, and as a result, the city opened up an investigation and has come to this final settlement for over $28,000 in unpaid wages, unpaid sick and safe time wages, and damages associated with those. And I just want to name that we see wage theft happen in our industry all the time. We have some of the highest rates of wage theft, and it looks like many different things, not just unpaid minimum wages. And it takes an immense amount of courage for workers to identify that things are going wrong and take action. We know that bosses sometimes retaliate, and that bosses really hold a lot of levers that affect our lives and our livelihood. And so taking action in a case like this is risky and takes incredible courage. And that's extremely exciting for us. So I think that just the last thing that I want to say is that at ROC Minnesota, we support workers across this industry. And we support workers in solving legal issues and extra legal issues that the law doesn't necessarily protect us on, but are issues of dignity and morality. And every day we get calls from workers who are taking more and more steps, like the workers that are on this call. And every time that we fight, we win. And I just want to say that again, that every time workers take a stand, come together to understand their rights better, every time we do that, we win changes in our workplaces. Some are small and some are really big, but every time we fight, we win. And I just couldn't be more happy and more honored and more proud of the work that we're doing than I am today, and standing with some of the workers that were a part of that. So I will, Anthony, I think I'm going to hand it back to you to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Eli. We really appreciate your great work and your leadership there in ROC Minnesota. A short reminder for all the reporters on the call: if you have any question, please post your name and your organization at any given time in the chat box, and you will be asked to unmute yourself when you ask your question during the Q&A. And so now we will hear from a current Blaze Pizza worker, Sydney Koran. She was part of the group of workers who worked with ROC Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis Civil Rights Department to win back wages for her and her co-workers. Sydney will share her story.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. As Anthony said, my name is Sydney Koran. I'm a senior nursing major and ROC MN member. I was hired by Team DHW, who are the former owners of Blaze Pizza, in September 2020. And it was the first job I had while also doing school, so I was nervous about it. I wasn't sure if I could balance it all, but the crew at Blaze seemed really relaxed. I quickly learned, however, that while the crew was agreeable, the management was really disorganized. On my first shift, I was trained in only one role of the many required to maintain the restaurant running smoothly. Everything else I learned over the next few weeks was information I had to seek out myself. Schedules also came out the night before the week started, and concerns we raised surrounding the safety of the store in the midst of COVID vaccines were dismissed. All of this also was before I learned that we weren't being paid a legal wage. I remember going into work one day and hearing a coworker complain about our wages. This was maybe 3 months into me working at Blaze. Until then, I had no idea anything was wrong. I expected that they were paying me a legal wage. I trusted them to do that because why wouldn't they? From my coworker, I learned about the wage violations, and they had spoken to our manager about it, but weren't hopeful about any resolution. Apparently, questions regarding pay had been raised before and were always dismissed. According to upper management, it wasn't in the budget. Meanwhile, I took out another loan to cover school and living expenses, which was really frustrating. I believe it was 3 times that our store manager told us that we were getting a raise to like $12.25. But I don't know if he was really fighting for that or if he was just trying to appease us. Regardless, the money never came, and I never actually noticed it until months later, because at that time funds were so tight for me that I dreaded looking at my weekly paychecks to the point where I avoided looking at them at all. Things really started to get bad, however, when the experienced staff started leaving. They were tired of false promises and blatant lack of care, and I was happy for them finally moving on with their lives. Unfortunately, though, with them went any semblance of organization. Training became nearly non-existent, and our turnover rates increased exponentially. Things progressed to a point where I dreaded work more than I cared about the money it provided me, but the thought of applying to a new job during school felt like too daunting of a task. So instead, during the lulls of my shift, I fantasized about like walking out of the door and never showing up again. And that was like my only escape. I wanted so badly to be anywhere else, but felt stuck in a position where my work was valued below minimum wage. Then one of my former coworkers reached out to me with the number of a representative at ROC Minnesota. I'd heard of them earlier, but everything had gotten to the before everything had gotten to the point of oblivion, but I felt I was too busy to reach out. But now had been pushed over my limit, so I met with ROC, and they helped me to file a complaint with the city. They told me exactly what the managers of Blaze were in violation of, and empowered my coworkers and I to take action. I was ready to be valued and to make sure that Team DHW understood what we all deserved and paid us back what we were owed. Today, I'm relieved to say that we got some retribution. We're being compensated for the stolen wages, omission of sick and safe time, and damages. In the end, the fight has been worth it, and I hope that our case inspires other Minneapolis workers to band together and fight for their rights. In numbers, we have strength, not only as coworkers fighting for one case, but as employees seeking dignity and respect all across the city. The more people we have organizing and holding our employers accountable, the safer an environment we can make Minneapolis a place to work and live.
Amazing. Thank you, Sydney. Next, I'm going to introduce, it is a pleasure to introduce Council Member for Ward 2, Robin Wansley-Warlaba. And I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you all so much for having me. As Eli mentioned, I'm the council member for Ward 2, which is home to the University of Minnesota, meaning that Blaze Pizza is right in our ward. So I'm very happy to be here and supporting the workers who were able to organize on their behalf and do so in partnership with both ROC, MN, and also extend that partnership to the city of Minneapolis with the Civil Rights Department to really make sure that we are, exemplifying a good model of what co-enforcement looks like behind some of these very progressive policies that we often organize a lot outside of City Hall to bring forward. As a case example, the wage theft policy. If it hadn't been for amazing workers like Sydney and their colleagues and the existence of organizations like ROC, I also want to give a shout out to other organizations like Setu and I Would, who have been doing a lot of this work in supporting our workers who are not getting the fair treatment, getting the wages that they deserve legally and just overall. And it's been left up to these workers, left up to these organizations to hold these corporate actors in our communities accountable. And Sydney raised a really good point. You would think that, as a worker, that should not be your role. You should be there to do your job, earn your wage, and go home, be respected, don't have to stress out, and trust that these corporations that have massive amounts of budgets with massive numbers of staff are doing everything that they can to make sure that you get paid on time, get the accurate wages that you deserve, all of your benefits are provided to you, and yet in the midst of you having to worry about school and possibly looking for other jobs and then taking on additional, stressors such as additional financial debt, then you're put into the position to hold your own employer accountable. And that's just completely unacceptable. So I think for me in the charge or my office and collaborating with our fellow colleagues is to do everything that we can to make sure that we're fully funding the co-enforcement model of these wage theft policies and other worker rights policies that have happened when, as many of you have articulated, when workers stood up and said enough is enough and decided to organize for better treatment, better workplace conditions. And they extended that to City Hall and say, as elected leaders that say you support workers, you need to make sure that we set those standards across the board and make sure our policies are not only reflective of that, but then they are enforced so that they can be effective, and also making sure workers are treated well in our city. So I just want to say thank you to all the workers at Blaze. I also want to say my apologies because this work should not have happened, or this work or burden of this work should not have been placed on your shoulders to begin with. And also want to say, I know, again, because we have both the University of Minnesota and Augsburg students, we see often students are usually, the fall victim to wage theft situations. And as a result of it, some of the things that you named, we see a lot of our workers, student workers, end up having to take on multiple jobs while you're there to earn your education. Or worse yet, have to take on additional debt that's going to follow you, post your academic career in order to make ends meet. And that's just completely unacceptable. In a city that has a large concentration of Fortune 500 companies, we should be doing everything that we can to make sure we're paying folks even above $15 at this point, including our students, regardless of where you inhabit. We need to be making sure that, working with our state partners and federal federal lawmakers that you all should be having a tuition-free university so you don't have to go and work at exploitative companies in the first place. So, you know, as a democratic socialist, I see the connections between wage theft to, you know, the predatory lending practices that happens at many of our four-year higher ed institutions, to even, you know, the housing development that surrounds the University of Minnesota, which is one of the key reasons why I support rent control, because we have so many students who are having to take out debt or work 2 or 3 jobs, not get paid the wages that they deserve because they're being stolen, in order to cover housing, cover food, and get an education. So it's just unrealistic of the toll that our students are having to bear in our current climate, economic climate. But I'm nevertheless so grateful that, again, we're seeing workers constantly rise up, like yourself, Sydney, and those at Blaze, those at ROC, all of the service, you know, workers, whether you're organized or through unionization or not. The fact that you're taking that step sets up just an example for other workers that they don't have to deserve, you know, subpar workplace conditions, and they definitely don't have to deserve having their wages stolen after they went in and did a hard day's work. So thank you all. You have an ally at the city who will do everything that we can to make sure that we're strengthening our wage theft enforcement practices and working with you all to bring forward additional worker rights policies that make sure that you are treated in the utmost care that you deserve for providing key services to our city and to our residents. So thank you all.
Thank you, Council Member Warlaba. It has been truly an honor having you here on this press call. For reporters who are on this call, again, please write your questions in the chat box. I know we have the top 5 television stations in the city, and we will call your name during the Q&A at the end of the presentations. Our next speaker is a former worker at Blaze Pizza at Stadium Village. She will also share with us her story, as well as the wage violations that she experienced under the former management. Let's welcome Ibe Tarrant. I'll hand it over to you now, Ibe.
Hello, my name is Ibe Tarrant, and I worked at Blaze Pizza from October of 2017 to March of 2021. And I've worked in the food service industry for about 8 years now. I'm a ROC Minnesota member, and I'm currently residing down in Phoenix, working my way into the music industry. So working at Blaze Pizza was quite the experience. I worked there for 3.5 years throughout my time in college at the University of Minnesota. And to be honest, when I look back and think about my college experience, Blaze was at the forefront. I worked full time, so Blaze occupied most of my life outside of school. The store was poorly managed from the start. People often wouldn't show up to their shifts, leaving us short-staffed at times such as game days when we had lines out the door. The training was limited and inconsistent, leaving employees unsure of how to properly do their job. The schedule was put out a day before the work week, which made it hard for us to plan our lives outside of work. And the general manager did not seem to care about his job, giving the staff little motivation to put in the effort needed to run their restaurant well. I didn't know the owners were stealing my wages. However, there was a poster of the labor laws in the kitchen that I would read occasionally and wonder if we were being paid correctly. So I brought it up to the management a couple times, but they were dismissive about the issue. From conversations with my coworkers, I know that many of us felt overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated most of the time. My friend who worked at Blaze with me knew someone who had spoken with ROC Minnesota, and we got in touch with Eli, and they were a tremendous help to us by educating us on our rights as workers and guiding us through the process of filing a claim with the city. When I found out that Blaze was in fact underpaying us, I was shocked but not surprised, because I felt like the company was untrustworthy. I was excited to learn that there was something we could do about the stolen wages and that there was a possibility of getting money back. Filing the claim was actually pretty simple, which made the whole process very easy. Fast forwarding to now, I remember waking up from a nap to a text from Eli saying the settlement was finalized and Blaze was going to pay about $30,000 of stolen wages back to their employees. This was huge news, and I was super happy and relieved. It took about 5 months between filing the claim and receiving the news, so I wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but it was better than I had imagined. I encourage everyone to make sure they're being paid correctly and review their rights as workers. Many businesses cheat money out of their employees, and it is important to hold them accountable and get your reparations. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. Really appreciate your presence here. It's really empowering to listen to your story. Now, our final speaker, but certainly not the least, our concluding speaker for today is the president and CEO of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, Dr. Siku Sibi. He will share with us some facts about wage theft and some of the past wage settlements that our worker members organized to make it happen, including the one last year in Minnesota. He will also speak about the Restaurant Workers' Bill of Rights, one of the most vital and critical policies that can eliminate wage violations. Let's welcome Dr. Siku Sibi.
Thank you, Anthony and Eli. Thank you, Minneapolis City Council member, Robin Lonsley. It is such an honor to have you. And most of all, thank you, Sydney and Ibai, and all the workers and friends who are joining us here. I have to take this moment to express how delighted I am today, celebrating the nearly $30,000 wage settlement with Blaze Pizza workers in Minneapolis. This is a huge victory, and I'm really proud of what the workers in ROC Minnesota have accomplished. Wage theft and violation should have no place in any workplace. What really breaks my heart is that the workers who have been robbed by the employers are most among the workers who have the lowest wage in America. They are the ones who need the hourly pay the most to support the families and the children. And they are the ones who work the longest hours in a month. But here are some staggering facts about the wage theft. The Department of Labor reports that there are more wage violations in the restaurant industry than any other industry in the United States. Between 2010 and 2012, about 84% of full-service restaurant workers, restaurant investigated have violated labor standard. Wage theft and hour violation impacted nearly 2.5 million restaurant workers. They lose more than $8 billion each year, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Last year alone, ROC United helped recover nearly $1 million in wage settlement for workers in California, Tennessee, and the Bartman restaurant workers in Minnesota. Since the pandemic hit in 2020, case of wage theft went up, said the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. You know why restaurant workers are susceptible to wage theft. Why wage theft is rampant across the country. Because the employer think that they can do it and get away with it. The good thing is that there is a ray of hope. Wage theft can be solved. It can be eradicated and from happening again through an effective and smart policy. As the president and CEO of ROC United, the largest and oldest restaurant worker organization in the country, I have to say that this is the reason why we need a restaurant worker bill of rights, a comprehensive policy framework that will champion at local, state, and national level. The restaurant worker bill of rights will systematically address challenges, injustices, including wage theft and discrimination that restaurant workers, and especially the people of color and women, face every day. It will focus on what restaurant workers deserve. Number one, a thriving life. Number two, healing and rest. Number three, a safe and dignified work environment. Number four, a universal healthcare, and bodily autonomy. And number 5, participation in governance. By Labor Day, on September 5th, ROC United planned to introduce the first Restaurant Worker Bill of Rights, accompanied by model local, state, and federal legislation that policymakers can introduce in their own communities in the US Congress. We must continue to educate restaurant workers about their right, to encourage them to speak out if they are not paid the amount that they have worked hard for, or they are feeling violated. The workers at Blaze Pizza in Stadium Village in Minneapolis organized themselves, raised their voices, and held the employer accountable. It was not only the right thing to do, it has to be done. At the end of the day, we should defend and sustain the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sekusidi, for that remarkable presentation. At this point, it's time to give our reporters the opportunity to ask their questions for our speakers. In fact, we have 2 questions in the pipeline. Our first question comes from Amy of Minnesota Workday. Amy, I'll hand it over to you to ask your questions. Please unmute yourself.
Congrats to the workers and the organizers. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. My first question is, who is a new owner of the franchise? And then another question for the workers, what was it like for your workplace to be under investigation?
I will just say, I'm not familiar with the new ownership. The previous ownership is called Team DHW LLC, and operated, according to our research, operated in several states, but has sold the franchise rights to Blaze to a new owner. And Sydney, I don't know if, by no means, I think, are we responsible for, or this issue is not with the new owner. So I will say that, our aim is not to highlight them, but just to name that there has been some justice here in the case of Team HW. But I'll pass it to y'all for the second question.
The second question comes from Mara.
Wait, sorry for the interruption, Anthony. Amy had a second question for the worker.
Oh, go for it.
I want to make sure.
Yeah.
I think it was hopeful, because we were like, well, maybe there'll at least be some accountability for all the garbage we went through, for lack of a better term.
Amy, do you have a follow-up question?
No, that answers my question. Thank you, though.
All right, thank you. Now let's move on. Let's go to Mara Whitaker. Mara, if you can ask your question here.
Hi, I'm a former Blaze employee. I worked there from March of 2018 until September of 2020. And first, I would just like to briefly say that I'm really, really proud of the Blaze workers who banded together to defend against the poor working conditions and the treatment from Team DHW and everything like that. I'm really proud of you guys, and I was very surprised and happy to hear about this. I just found out about it the other day. Big love to all of you. Even if I never met you during my time there, I'm still a fan. My question is, how can former and current Blaze employees get more information about the details of this settlement and determine whether or not they may receive back wages? I've had a few other former employees that are friends of mine send me messages who also don't know very much about what's going on, and we would just like to be able to have some sort of understanding of what might or might not be coming our way.
Yeah, so we've gotten contacted by several former employees who have a similar question. And I would say, Mara, you and I should check in offline. But an easy step is to contact the Civil Rights Department of the city of Minneapolis with the question of, am I included in this settlement or not? And as I understand it, workers who believe that they are owed back wages, even if they were not covered by this settlement, have retained the private right of action and can actually follow up in small claims court for those lost wages. So those would be the two steps, and we're here to support folks with the small claims issues if that is a course of action that folks want to take. So I'll put my email into the chat so you can follow up with me directly.
Thank you. Here's a question that was sent through a text message, and this is directed to all the speakers. What are the changes that you'd like to see in the restaurant industry as far as wages are concerned? So to all the speakers, I hope you can address that question. Should we start with Dr. CB?
I think Ibe had.
Yeah, let's start with your workers first.
Ibe, you had your hand up, but you're on mute.
What I was gonna say.
Sorry, what?
Or should I answer now or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that one thing that I remembered at Blaze was having to do with like the pay was the tipping. For like 2 years, we weren't doing like electronic tips, and it was just cash tips. So literally like every 2 weeks, the max tips would be like $10 for 80 hours of work. For like, that's how much like I would get, would be around $10, sometimes even less, like $8 after 2 weeks. But then they did like implement like an electronic tipping system, which helped get us a little bit more tips. So I feel like that's like something that could be done, is making sure like workers get tipped properly. Because I feel like I go into a lot of restaurants and they don't allow their workers to get tipped, even though they're still getting paid probably minimum wage. And I feel like that's how a lot of people are making their money, is through tips these days. So yeah, that's just a thought I had.
Kind of elaborating on that, I would like to see employers stop pretending like tips can make up the gap. I remember after some management changes when we were still with Team DHW, but things were starting to go downhill with them, and they were starting to think about, I think, selling the property. But we had a retraining session, and this was after some more wage concerns had come up, and they they had the audacity to say to us, they were like, if you like smile and you're really friendly, you'll make more tips, so you'll make more money. And I'm like, but you still aren't paying us minimum wage. Like, that's not right. So I'd like to see that respected more, just more respect.
Yeah, if I need to add anything, it is for our perspective. We have surveyed a lot of workers. I think the first thing that come up is the thriving wage. And a thriving wage can be anything. We don't have a fixation on $15 an hour. It is a living wage that we're fighting for at ROC. And a living wage is very much different from the $15 an hour. Another element that we need to push forth is the complete elimination of the tip credit. Tip earners need to make the full minimum wage. If anything that we've seen during the pandemic is that based on scheduling, customers may be in or may not come. So workers don't earn enough tip to make the difference between the tip credit and the full minimum wage. So full minimum wage for everybody. Tip is a gratuity. It shouldn't be part of a salary. So We should never put a worker in a situation where we don't know how much they're going to make because we don't know if they're going to get a tip. But that aside, with a federal minimum wage of $7 to 25 cents, I think it is one of the most ridiculous things to have the minimum wage, for 23 years at the same level, while we all know inflation is going up, even month in, month out, prices are going up, your wage is stagnant. It means that your wage has less value every month. So that's kind of problematic for us. Young people are taking loans just to survive while they're working full time. So a thriving wage is something that's critical, it is important. And that thriving wage may be at $23 or $24 in San Francisco for anybody to survive, and maybe at $20 in Minnesota. But this is what workers need for them to be able to take care of themselves, their families, and their children, if they have some.
Yeah, and I think I will just add that this settlement is coming because workers learned their rights and were able to trigger a system that enforces their rights. And I think for us, this isn't directly about wages, but it's about our rights as workers and respect and dignity, which is that, we fought tooth and nail to raise the minimum wage, to guarantee paid sick time in this city, and to create anti-wage theft policies. But when you look at the resources that the city of Minneapolis and the mayor have put towards the enforcement of those policies versus law enforcement in police departments, it's minuscule. And I just want to reinforce that this happened because of enforcement and because of enforcement of the city of Minneapolis and because of ROC Minnesota. That's an organization that's one of our key goals is to make sure workers know their rights. Budgets are political documents. And, I think one change that we could see in our city is doubling down and significant investments in enforcing the law, not just on, communities of color and poor communities in our city, but also business owners who are cheating workers out of what they deserve. And so I think that could be a really significant step that, we fight for every year in the budget and will continue to fight for going forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Warlaba, any thoughts on the question before we move on to the next?
I think the council member had to hop off.
Yeah. All right. Well, the next question comes from ABS-CBN Television News from Don Tagala. Don, please ask your question here.
Thank you. Can we confirm that one of the wage theft victims is of Filipino descent or is Filipino, and is the Philippine consulate in Chicago in contact with this individual for assistance as a Filipino national in distress? And what's his situation now? And is this a case, labor trafficking case as well? Thank you.
Eli?
To the best of my knowledge, no. This is a wage theft case that does not cross over into labor trafficking, though it's certainly possible that I'm not informed on the totality of the legal process that's been enacted. And so it's possible, but we don't have that information. And I think you might be best suited reaching out to the communications department at the city of Minneapolis with that question, but we can't confirm that.
Thank you. Let's give Moshin a chance to ask his question on the workers' Bill of Rights. I believe this is directed specifically for Dr. Seavey.
Yes, my question is, What are the chances that Congress will take up restaurant workers' Bill of Rights, and what are the prospects that the proposed bill will be passed? And what challenges do you expect?
I think I will go back to what Eli said earlier. If you're ready to organize, if you're willing to organize, you can win. So a win is never granted. It is our ability to organize that will determine the. This is part of the reason why we're putting in place a comprehensive process to talk to workers in all 50 states, at least 5 languages, to build the momentum to such an extent that we will build enough power to force Congress to take on the bill and pass it. But it's all going to depend on our capacity to mobilize all our constituents. And we believe we have a might to do that. And I can give you one example. Back in the day, back in around 2010, when I was organizing in New York City, the city's minimum wage was about $7.50. I was told by employers that the city is never going to raise the minimum wage and increase the tip credit. But you look forward 10 years later, the minimum wage has doubled in the city from $7.25, it went to $15. And the same individuals, when I sat down with them last year, they told me, you're not going to get the living wage. And I say, I completely disagree. If the minimum wage was able to increase by 100% in the city, why don't we think that it can go to $23? It is the power of your belief and your ability to organize workers because they deserve it. And part of the reason we talk about the rising wage is if you look at 2009, a minimum wage, a federal minimum wage at $7.25, and you align it with inflation, that number should have been around $22, $23. And probably as we should have increased this year because of the way inflation went up. So is it possible? Yes, it is our ability to organize and to workers to believe that they deserve better, which I know they do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here's another question. It seems that wage theft is so not uncommon among Minnesota employers. Why is that?
If I may, I will let me start, right? I would say that this is not something that's common just in Minnesota. In my presentation, I said the wage theft in the US, workers lost around $8 billion, right? But the reality is, if an employer, you take an employer who steal wages from the workers, in 10 years, he can save $500,000 and $1 million in 10 years. And he ended up paying in the settlement $30,000. The question is, what benefit the employer when there is no enforcement, when the workers don't organize, right? It is stealing is more beneficial for them than paying workers correctly because in too many places, the enforcement doesn't have enough teeth. Thanks to God, we have the ROC Minnesota in Minnesota. So I'll let Eli talk about Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just tie it back to enforcement, which is that, when you look at property theft enforcement and even like parking violation enforcement compared to the enforcement of labor standards in our city, in our state, in the country, it's negligence. And I believe that's because of power structures, and the folks that have the most power in our world right now are the folks with the most money. And so they're going to create laws and enforcement mechanisms that protect their assets. And the bottom line is that like workers ain't their assets. Workers are seen often as a cost on a spreadsheet. And when we are seen as a cost on a spreadsheet, folks look for any way to reduce that cost to increase profits. And they forget about who we are, which are people with families, with passions, with dreams, and the right to live a life that is just as thriving as someone who owns a business. So, I think a big part of that is that there isn't a significant enough investment in the enforcement and the co-enforcement with community organizations like ours to do the work of education and outreach. And, I will say that we have more people contact us with issues more than we can handle. And we're growing our capacity in building, but the truth is that these issues are rampant in our industry. And it's because, in some ways that we as workers have very little power in the balance of power today. And I think that, the future that we vision with ROC Minnesota is that in, 10 years in the city of Minneapolis, workers have a strong and credible seat at the table where decisions about our lives are being made, both at a policy level, but also in our own restaurants. And, in part that's partnering with unions, and in part that's just continuing to build our membership and pushing the city to continue to double down on investments in our lives. So that would be my answer. Ibai, did you want to say something? I saw you come off of mute.
Oh, that was an accident.
Okay, cool.
Sydney? Okay. Here's a question from the Daily Inquirer. Damages are very difficult to quantify, and the impact can be irreversible. What does this settlement mean to you for the workers?
नहीं ले जाओ काली कहाँ खड़ी है वो बैंक के पास खड़ी टीडी बैंक के पास काली
Can you repeat the question again, Anthony?
The question, damages are hard to quantify, but the impact can be irreversible. What does this settlement mean to you for the workers?
I'd say it's a little bit of relief. I don't think it fully is going to cover the emotional drain that some of this has been, or the consequences that come from being paid not a livable wage for X amount of time. But my hope is that Team DHW will take it as a point for self-reflection and think about the impact of their choices on their workers and change their policies in the future in whatever capacity they operate, and make it something that can, I hope that we help future workers who might be employed by them.
Thank you, Sydney.
And going off of what Sydney said, and I agree, while it is nice to receive some money, the emotional toll that it took on us working there, I don't know if that can be paid back, because it was pretty frustrating working there. And I know a bunch of people would leave work literally crying or just not okay, and the shifts weren't great. So I feel that's something you can't really just pay back. I feel it is nice knowing that DHW is being held accountable for their actions, and I want them to know that they did wrong and to apologize. But yeah, it's relieving, but it's also still not a full yeah, it's not.
Thank you, Abai. Eli, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, the state law has limits on what damages can be quantified up to. But yeah, I think it's really hard to quantify what it means to be working full time and, working as hard as you really can, and still not being able to like make ends meet. I think that and when you zoom out and you look at the reality that that's happening to our community, it's not just individuals, right? Like, I think there are wide impacts on what it means to be in poverty or, as a working poor person or a working person in our city. It's about our families. It's not just about individuals. And I do think, I wish that the statute allowed for damages to be extended to our roommates and our kids and our partners, but they don't. They cover individuals. And so I think, as always, there are limitations to the law. And I think, as Sibi was mentioning, our vision for this work is that we win the real vision of the world that we ought to live in. And I think we really see this settlement as a step, not only in making right workers who were cheated and stolen from, but also in us understanding that we do have power and that we can change these things. And so, it's a step and a big one, and it's just one step in a long walk. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one last thing that I would like to add, another limitation is what we call a status of limitation, right? So if you have a wage theft in a place for 5 years, one of the reasons why the restaurant employers will get away is the law doesn't allow you to go more than 2-3 years. So that's a major limitation for you. It took from you, and the law says you cannot go back more than 3 years, even if they stole from you more than 3 years. So you can never be whole. And that's the reality of those low-wage workers. It is hard because you're talking about the people who are earning the lowest of the wages. And they're working extra hours so we can increase those wages. And they are the ones who are victim again from the employers. There is a real benefit from those employers with a status of limitation because they don't have to pay it all. I take 10 years of wages from you, and we negotiate, and I end up giving you 2. And that's what workers are facing.
Wow, this has been an enlightening and empowering discussion. If you have any follow-up questions, please email Eli Stein. We posted his email address in the chat box, and he will connect you with our speakers. Thank you to our speakers, reporters, and everyone here for your time and participation today. We will send the recording of this event, as well as the press release and photos of the Blaze Pizza workers later today. This conference is now adjourned. Thank you.